I first began studying the architectural history of the so-called Tartarian cities, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I simply wanted to understand why so many old photographs, taken between the 1850s and early 1900s, show cities that look impossibly advanced for their time. And the more I researched, the more a pattern emerged. A pattern that historians rarely mention, and one that modern textbooks never explain. Because across Europe, across Asia, across the Americas, the same strange features repeat. Cities filled with monumental buildings far beyond 19th century engineering. Facades carved with precision that should have required modern machinery, domes, spires, arches, and star-shaped layouts appearing across continents. Massive civic structures with no clear construction records. Only renovation records. Blueprints missing key pages, the pages that should describe how they were built. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. These cities didn't just look old, they looked inherited. Take any major city built before the 1900s, Paris, St. Petersburg, Chicago, Buenos Aires, Mumbai, Tokyo, and compare their earliest surviving photographs. You'll see enormous stone buildings that contradict the technology of their supposed era. Perfect symmetry, multi-ton blocks lifted with no cranes. Decorative stone cut so clean it resembles laser machining. Columns and arches carved with a level of precision that industrial tools of the time simply could not achieve. And yet the same official explanation keeps repeating itself. These were built by skilled masons of the industrial age. But that explanation collapses the moment you notice the details, because many of these structures were documented before cities had the ability to produce steel at scale, before they had machinery capable of moving 10-ton stone blocks, before they had standardized construction equipment, and in some cases, before the city even had a proper population large enough to build them. So the question becomes unavoidable. Where did these buildings truly come from? As I continued analyzing archive photographs, engravings, and city plans, another pattern emerged, one that connects directly to the idea of Tartaria. These buildings appear everywhere at the same time, with the same style, the same geometry, the same monumental scale. It didn't matter whether the structure stood in Russia, France, Morocco, India, Mexico, or the American West. They all looked like they were part of the same architectural language, a global style, a shared blueprint. Yet no historian claims these nations coordinated their designs. So why do they match? Why do buildings separated by oceans look like they were drawn by the same hand? Why do so many cities start their construction records in the 1870s, yet have photographs showing the buildings already complete decades earlier? And why do so many of these structures appear partially buried in the oldest photos, lower floors hidden, windows at ground level, entire foundations missing from view? These are not fringe observations. They're in the photographs anyone can view, and once you notice them, you cannot unsee them. Before we go deeper, before we examine the erased construction records, the repeated architectural anomalies, and the cities that appear to have been inherited rather than built, make sure you're subscribed if you want more investigations like this. It tells me you want the full series, and it genuinely helps this research continue. Thank you. Now, here's where the story turns. Because when you trace these buildings back far enough, when you compare their floor plans, their stonework, their proportions, something becomes clear. These structures follow an older system of design, a system based on geometry, symmetry, resonance, and energy flow. A system historians don't teach, a system that appears across continents as if a single civilization once influenced them all. Modern researchers call that civilization Tartaria. And whether Tartaria was an empire, a network of cities, or a technological tradition lost to time, the evidence points to one conclusion. The beautiful cities we admire today may not have been built by the societies that inherited them. They may be the remnants of a world that came before. The more I compared Tartarian-era cities across continents, the more one fact refused to disappear. Their architecture does not match the civilization we're told built it. Not in scale, not in engineering, not in precision, not even in purpose. Because everywhere you look, from St. Petersburg to Chicago, from Paris to Melbourne, the same pattern appears. Enormous, mathematically perfect buildings, appearing suddenly in the historical record, with construction timelines that make no sense. The official story claims these buildings were created by local architects, using local labor in surprisingly short timeframes. But when you examine the details closely, the entire narrative begins to fall apart. Let's start with the foundations. Across multiple cities, the so-called 19th century buildings have foundations that stretch far deeper than what any 19th century construction method required. In many Tartarian sites, the lowest levels are not just deep. They contain full windows, full arches, and sometimes entire floors that now sit underground. Why would anyone design functional architecture and then bury it? The standard explanation is simple. Cities raise their streets, but raise them by how much? Why at the exact same time period across multiple countries? And why does the architectural precision of those buried floors far exceed the skill level attributed to builders of that era? When you compare these underground levels across continents, something strange happens. They match. The dimensions, the ratios, the arch geometry, they follow the same design logic. A logic that appears in city after city after city. This is where the Tartaria hypothesis becomes impossible to ignore, because the deeper you go into the research, the clearer it becomes that these cities weren't simply adapting to the industrial age, they were rebuilding on top of something older. The patterns continue above ground too. The grand facades of these structures, the huge pillars, the perfect archways, the ornamental geometry, all point to a level of engineering refinement far ahead of what the 1800s supposedly possessed. Engineers of the time are credited with these designs, yet their own journals rarely explain how the work was done. Instead, they describe themselves as overseeing, restoring, or expanding already existing structures, not building them. It is as if the architects were decorators, while the underlying structure belonged to a previous civilization. And then there's the scale. Many of these Tartarian-era cities contain buildings so gigantic that even modern construction crews would require cranes, reinforced concrete, precision machines, and computer modeling to attempt them. Yet the official story claims they were erected by men with chisels, ropes, horses, and wooden scaffolding. When you look at the timelines, the contradictions grow even larger. Structures said to take decades were supposedly built in just a few years. Cities devastated by fires or floods somehow rebuilt colossal architectural masterpieces in impossibly short periods. That detail alone should force historians to stop and ask questions. But for some reason, it never does. And then comes the most unsettling discovery. The same buildings appear across the world before the countries that owned them had any architectural connection. How does French architecture appear in Melbourne before French architects arrived there? How does Russian-style masonry show up in cities that Russia never controlled? Why do early American cities have European designs even before mass immigration waves arrived? Unless the architectural language came before the nations, not after. Unless these cities were built within a shared system, a shared knowledge base, belonging to a civilization that predated the countries themselves. A civilization modern researchers now call Tartaria. As you compare the domes, the columns, the star-shaped fort layouts, the underground levels, and the water systems, the picture becomes clearer. These cities weren't built from scratch. They were activated, renovated, and claimed by newer governments. And the so-called Victorian boom starts looking less like a burst of innovation and more like a coordinated repurposing of infrastructure from an earlier world, a world far more advanced than ours. In this next episode, we will walk directly into the part of the story that almost no historian wants to address. How an empire capable of building the most harmonious, mathematically perfect cities on Earth vanished from the record within a single generation. Because the question isn't whether Tartaria existed. The evidence is everywhere. The architecture, the scale, the precision, the global consistency, all far beyond what the 1700s or 1800s could reasonably produce. The real mystery is why the world agreed to forget it. The era of removal. By the mid-1800s, something changes in the historical record. Not slowly, not naturally, but abruptly. Across Europe, Asia, the Americas, the same pattern appears. Architectural symbols of Tartaria are stripped away, domes replace towers, dismantled interiors, remodeled beyond recognition. Entire building levels buried under street-raising maps, revised city plans, rewritten everywhere you look. The evidence points not to decline, but to active removal. And the more you examine the sequence, the more deliberate it feels. Governments begin issuing new architectural codes. City planners standardize old districts. Historic buildings are suddenly reclassified as Victorian, even when photographs show they were already centuries old. It's like watching a civilization being overwritten in real time. Where the records should be, there is silence when you trace these cities back. You expect archives filled with construction logs, engineering drafts, supply records, labor documents. But instead, you find nothing. Blueprints missing. Architects credited with buildings they mathematically could not have designed. Entire city blocks anonymously, constructed with no documents surviving. This type of silence doesn't happen naturally. It happens when someone wants gaps. It happens when someone needs history to restart at a certain point. The reset explanations never add up. Official history claims. Fires destroyed records, wars destroyed archives, poor documentation, unknown architects, style imitation, economic reforms. But none of those explanations account for what we see. Why are Tartarian structures found across multiple continents, all sharing identical geometry, ratios, and building logic? Why do cities built independently follow the same blueprint? Central domes, star layouts, radial streets, perfect symmetry. Why does the disappearance of Tartarian influence occur at the exact same time worldwide? Patterns like that are never accidents. The takeover of a world ready-made. As empires expanded, the British, the French, the Russian, the American, they did something strange. Instead of building cities from scratch, they moved into existing ones. Government buildings repurposed, palaces rebranded, stations renamed, monuments rededicated. Almost as if the world they conquered was already built. The Industrial Age didn't invent modern cities, it inherited them. And once inherited, a slow rewrite began. The final erase. Education by the early 1900s. The final phase of the rewrite appears. School textbooks change. Suddenly, the term Tartaria disappears. Old maps are corrected, world fairs present technology as new photography focuses on progress, not origins. The idea of a worldwide older civilization becomes ridiculed. This is how erasure becomes permanent, not through destruction, but through replacement. Once a new story is taught for 3 generations, the old world, no matter how massive, becomes a myth. So why erase Tartaria? From everything we've examined, only 3 explanations make sense. 1. Control. A civilization that used natural geometry, resonance, and sustainable engineering threatens every industrial empire built on profit. 2. Inheritance. The new powers didn't build the world. They inherited the remains of someone who did. Acknowledging that destroys the narrative of modern progress. 3. Technology. If Tartarian cities operated with water-powered energy systems, resonant architecture, global geometric alignment, non-combustion transport, then the Industrial Revolution wasn't an advancement. It was a downgrade. No empire can afford the world realizing that. The cities remain. But the story was removed, and that leads us to the conclusion that ties everything together. Tartaria didn't disappear. Its buildings are still here. Its layouts are still here. Its geometry is still here. Its fingerprints are in every major city on Earth. What disappeared was the memory, the credit, and the understanding of the civilization that built them. Tartaria wasn't lost, it was overwritten. And in the next videos in this series, we're going deeper into the cities themselves, exploring the structures, the hidden lower floors, and the blueprints that survived the rewrite. Because the truth wasn't destroyed, it was buried, and we're unearthing it piece by piece.